The most life-changing moments rarely begin with a scream. Sometimes they begin with someone quietly saying, "Come with me." If you had asked me that morning whether I trusted my husband, I would have answered without hesitation. I loved Ryan Parker, and after 11 years of marriage, I believed I knew the rhythm of his voice, the meaning behind every smile, and the little habits that made him who he was. We were not perfect, but we had built a comfortable life together in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio. Saturday mornings usually meant grocery shopping, grabbing coffee, and arguing playfully over which cereal tasted better, the healthy one I preferred or the sugary one Ryan secretly loved. Nothing about that day felt different. The autumn air carried a crisp chill, and golden leaves drifted across the parking lot as we pulled into the shopping center just after 10 o'clock. Ryan turned off the engine, smiled at me, and reached for my hand. "I just need a few minutes inside," he said. "There is one thing I forgot to pick up. Stay here if you want. I will be right back." Those words sounded ordinary enough that I barely looked up from my phone. "Take your time," I answered with a laugh. "Just do not come back with another gadget we do not need." He grinned, promised he would behave, and disappeared through the automatic glass doors of the department store. I watched him for a second before settling back into my seat. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I scrolled through messages from my sister, checked the weather forecast, and listened to a local radio station playing old country songs. 15 minutes became 20. I frowned, wondering how one forgotten item could possibly require that much time. I considered calling him, but I stopped myself. Ryan was the kind of person who lost track of time whenever he started talking to someone he knew. Maybe he had run into an old coworker. Maybe the checkout line was unusually long. There were dozens of reasonable explanations, and I accepted every one of them because trust has a way of filling in the blanks before doubt ever has the chance. Finally, I decided to stretch my legs. I stepped out of the car, locked the door, and walked toward the entrance, the cool breeze tugging gently at my jacket. Families pushed shopping carts across the sidewalk, children laughed as they carried fresh pretzels from the food court, and everything around me felt perfectly normal. As I reached the front doors, a young store employee wearing a navy blue name tag looked directly at me. She hesitated for just a heartbeat, as though making a difficult decision, then quietly stepped closer. Her expression was calm, but there was something unmistakably serious in her eyes. She lowered her voice so no one else could hear. "Are you Emily Parker?" she asked. My stomach tightened. "Yes," I replied. She glanced over her shoulder before looking back at me with quiet determination. "Please," she whispered, "come with me." For a moment I simply stared at her, convinced she had mistaken me for someone else. "Is something wrong?" I asked, keeping my voice low. The young woman offered a polite but nervous smile that did little to calm the growing knot in my stomach. "Please," she repeated gently. "I promise I will explain in just a minute." There was something in the way she spoke that made it impossible to ignore her. She was not frightened. She was careful, almost as if she had rehearsed those words before walking over to me. I glanced through the front windows, hoping to catch a glimpse of Ryan somewhere inside, but all I could see were shoppers moving from aisle to aisle beneath bright ceiling lights. I followed the employee through the entrance, past displays of seasonal decorations and rows of shopping carts. Instead of leading me deeper into the sales floor, she guided me down a quiet hallway marked "Employees Only." The fluorescent lights hummed softly above us, and every step seemed to echo louder than the last. My heart began to race, not because I expected danger, but because uncertainty has a way of creating fears that facts never do. "My husband came in about 20 minutes ago," I finally said. "Is this about him?" She hesitated before answering. "Yes. But before we continue, I need you to know that he is safe." Those 4 words should have comforted me, yet they only made me wonder why she had needed to say them at all. We stopped outside a small office with a glass window overlooking part of the store. She opened the door and invited me inside. The room was simple, with a desk, 2 chairs, a coffee maker, and a bulletin board covered with employee schedules. She motioned for me to sit down while she quietly closed the door behind us. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she said. "I know this is unusual, and I am sorry to pull you away without an explanation." I nodded, unable to think of anything else to do. "Can someone please tell me what is happening?" Before Sarah could answer, another employee, an older man wearing a manager's badge that read David Collins, stepped into the office. His expression was calm and professional, but I could tell he had chosen his words carefully long before entering the room. "Mrs. Parker," he began, "nothing criminal has happened, and no one is in physical danger. We simply believe there is something you deserve to know before you leave here today." I looked from David to Sarah, searching their faces for some clue that would make sense of any of this. Instead, Sarah reached into a folder resting on the desk. She placed one hand gently on it without opening it, then met my eyes with quiet compassion. "Emily," she said softly, "what we are about to show you may answer questions you never realized you needed to ask." My eyes never left the folder as Sarah slowly opened it and slid a single sheet of paper across the desk toward me. It was not a legal document or a police report. It was a printed photograph taken from one of the store's security cameras only minutes earlier. At first I did not understand what I was looking at. Then I recognized Ryan standing near the customer service counter. He was speaking with an elderly woman whose shopping cart had tipped over, scattering several bags across the floor. The woman appeared embarrassed as other customers walked around her. My husband was kneeling beside her, helping gather her groceries with the same patient smile I had seen hundreds of times at home. I looked up, confused. "I do not understand," I said. "He was just helping someone." David nodded. "That is exactly what happened." Sarah folded her hands together before continuing. "The woman insisted on paying Ryan for his help. She believed he had saved her from a very difficult afternoon. Your husband refused every dollar she offered. Instead, he quietly paid for several items she could not afford after her card was declined." I blinked, trying to process what I had just heard. Ryan had never mentioned anything about wanting to do something like that. We were comfortable financially, but we still planned our budget carefully. "Why would that require bringing me back here?" I asked softly. Sarah looked down for a moment before meeting my eyes again. "Because what happened afterward was even more important." She reached into the folder once more and placed a handwritten envelope on the desk. Across the front was written only one word in careful cursive letters, "Emily." "The elderly customer asked if we could help her find you," Sarah explained. "She said your husband told her he never wanted credit for kindness because he believed the people he loved mattered more than recognition from strangers. She wanted you to know the kind of man you were married to." I felt my throat tighten. My first instinct was to smile, yet something inside me refused to let the moment settle so easily. If that was all, why had everyone seemed so serious? David noticed the question forming on my face. "Mrs. Parker," he said gently, "there is one more thing. When your husband was checking out, he asked one of our associates if there was a private room where he could leave something for you before he met you outside. He said he wanted it to be a surprise, but after everything that happened today, we believe you should receive it exactly as he intended." Sarah carefully lifted a small white gift bag from beneath the desk, placed it in front of me, and quietly whispered, "He hoped this would remind you how grateful he is that you never stopped believing in him." My hands trembled as I reached for the small white gift bag. It was surprisingly light, and for a brief second I wondered whether I should wait for Ryan before opening it. Somehow, though, it already felt as if this moment belonged to all three of us, to Sarah, David, and me, because they had become quiet witnesses to something deeply personal. I carefully pulled back the tissue paper and found a simple leather journal tied with a narrow blue ribbon. Resting on top was a folded note written in Ryan's unmistakable handwriting. I unfolded it slowly, hearing nothing except the soft hum of the air conditioner in the office. Emily, if you are reading this before I make it back to the car, then my surprise did not go exactly as planned. Maybe that is all right. Some things find us at the right time instead of the perfect time. Thank you for believing in me through every ordinary day, because ordinary days become extraordinary when they are shared with someone who sees the best in you. I stopped reading for a moment as tears blurred the words. Ryan had never been someone who spoke dramatically. He usually expressed love through small gestures, fixing things around the house, bringing me coffee before work, remembering the little details that everyone else forgot. Seeing those feelings written on paper somehow made them even more real. I opened the journal and discovered that every few pages contained short handwritten memories from our marriage. There was the day we painted our first living room together and accidentally covered ourselves in blue paint. There was the weekend we drove for hours just to watch the leaves change in the mountains. There was even a page describing the evening we sat on our back porch during a thunderstorm, saying almost nothing while listening to the rain. None of those memories were expensive. None of them would impress strangers. Yet together they told the story of a life that had been built one quiet moment at a time. Sarah smiled softly as she watched me turn the pages. He asked if we could keep the bag behind the counter until he finished helping that customer, she explained. He wanted to surprise you before the two of you went to lunch. David nodded. He said today was not about buying something valuable. He wanted to give you something that could not be replaced. I closed the journal carefully against my chest, overwhelmed by emotions I could barely name. Just then I heard the office door open behind me. Before anyone spoke, I recognized the familiar sound of Ryan's footsteps, followed by a voice filled not with panic or fear, but with gentle confusion. Emily, he asked quietly. How did you end up in here? I turned toward him with the journal still pressed against my chest, and the look on Ryan's face told me he had no idea what had happened over the past few minutes. His eyes moved from me to Sarah, then to David, before settling on the white gift bag sitting on the desk. A slow smile spread across his face, followed almost immediately by a look of embarrassment. I was hoping to give that to you myself, he said with a quiet laugh. I guess surprises do not always cooperate. I walked across the room without thinking and wrapped my arms around him. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Sometimes silence says everything words cannot. When I finally stepped back, I held up the journal. You wrote all of this? I asked. He nodded. A little at a time over the past year. I wanted to give you something that would last longer than flowers or jewelry. I could not stop looking at him. Why today? Ryan glanced toward the window before answering. Because I realized I spend too much time assuming you already know how grateful I am. I tell myself there will always be another birthday, another anniversary, another weekend. Then I started wondering what would happen if I kept waiting for the perfect moment. I did not want appreciation to become something I only felt instead of something I actually shared. Sarah quietly excused herself, but before leaving she smiled at both of us. I hope you do not mind what we did, she said. When the customer asked us to help make sure this reached Emily, it felt like the right thing to do. Ryan looked genuinely surprised. Mrs. Hayes asked you to do that? David smiled. She told us that kindness deserves to travel farther than the moment it happens. Ryan lowered his head with a modest grin. I was only helping. Exactly, David replied. You thought it was only helping. She thought it restored her faith in people. Those words settled over the room with a quiet weight. On the drive to the store, I had expected nothing more than another ordinary Saturday. Instead, I found myself watching complete strangers speak about my husband with a respect that had nothing to do with money, success, or appearance. It came entirely from the way he had treated another human being when no one expected recognition. As we thanked Sarah and David and prepared to leave, I slipped my hand into Ryan's. He squeezed it gently, just as he had done thousands of times before, yet somehow it felt different. Walking back through the store together, I realized the greatest surprises are not the ones hidden inside gift bags. They are the moments that quietly reveal the true character of someone you thought you already knew by heart. We left the office carrying nothing more than a small gift bag and a journal, yet it felt as though we were walking out with something far more valuable. The afternoon sunlight poured through the front windows as we stepped into the parking lot, and for the first time all day I noticed how peaceful everything around us seemed. Families loaded groceries into their cars, shopping carts rattled across the pavement, and somewhere nearby a child laughed as a flock of birds scattered into the bright blue sky. The world had continued exactly as it always had, yet something inside me had quietly shifted. Ryan opened the passenger door for me before walking around to the driver's side. Neither of us rushed to start the engine. We simply sat there in comfortable silence, letting the emotions of the past hour settle naturally. Finally, Ryan smiled. "I suppose lunch is running a little late." I laughed through the last of my tears. I do not think either of us expected today to go this way. He shook his head. "Definitely not." He looked at the journal resting on my lap before speaking again. "There is something I never told you." I turned toward him, curious rather than worried. "Every Sunday night after you went to bed, I wrote one page. Sometimes it took 5 minutes. Sometimes I sat there for an hour trying to find the right words. I realized I remembered all the big milestones in our marriage, but I did not want to lose the little moments that actually built our life." His honesty made me think about how easily people assume love is measured by dramatic gestures. In reality, it often grows through ordinary routines that almost seem too small to matter until years have passed. "Why did you never let me see any of it?" I asked. Ryan rested his hands on the steering wheel for a moment before answering. "Because I wanted you to experience it all at once. I wanted you to know that while life kept moving, I never stopped noticing you." Those words stayed with me long after we finally drove away from the store. We ended up eating lunch at a small family restaurant a few miles away, talking less about the surprise itself and more about the memories inside the journal. We laughed about old vacations that had gone completely wrong, remembered our first tiny apartment with its noisy heating system, and even debated which of us had burned dinner more often during our first year of marriage. As the afternoon slowly turned toward evening, I realized the greatest gift Ryan had given me was not the journal itself. It was the reminder that gratitude should never wait for a special occasion. Sometimes the strongest marriages are not built by extraordinary events. They are built by people who choose, day after day, to notice the goodness in one another before life becomes too busy to say it out loud. Over the next several weeks, the journal became part of our daily routine without either of us planning it. Every evening after dinner, I would open to another page, and together we would revisit a memory that had quietly shaped our marriage. Some entries were only a few sentences long. Others filled several pages with details I had completely forgotten. Ryan remembered the exact color of the sweater I wore on our first road trip through the Smoky Mountains. He remembered the tiny diner where we celebrated paying off our first car loan. He even remembered the afternoon we spent planting flowers in our backyard, laughing because neither of us knew the first thing about gardening. Reading those pages reminded me that happiness rarely announces itself while we are living it. Most of the time it disguises itself as an ordinary Tuesday, an unexpected conversation, or a quiet drive home after work. One evening I asked Ryan a question that had been lingering in my mind ever since the department store. "Do you always stop to help people when you see someone struggling?" He smiled thoughtfully before answering. "Not always as well as I should. Sometimes I am in a hurry, and sometimes I miss the opportunity. But I keep thinking about how easily our lives could be different. Someday that elderly woman could be one of our parents. Someday it could be us. I hope that if we ever need kindness, someone chooses not to walk away." His words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. They changed the way I looked at the people around me. I found myself smiling more often at cashiers, holding doors open a little longer, and paying closer attention to those who seemed invisible to everyone else. Kindness, I realized, was quietly contagious. A few days later, I found a small envelope tucked between the pages of the journal that I had somehow missed before. Inside was a simple card with one sentence written across the front. "Thank you for making every ordinary day feel like home." There was no expensive gift attached, no grand announcement, only those few heartfelt words. I carried that card in my purse from then on, not because I needed a reminder that Ryan loved me, but because it reminded me never to assume that people already know what is in our hearts. Sometimes appreciation must be spoken before time carries the opportunity away. Looking back now, I understand that the most important thing I brought home from that store was not the journal or the handwritten note. It was a new way of seeing the quiet moments that surround us every day, moments that often become the strongest foundation for a life filled with gratitude, compassion, and love. Nearly a year passed before I found myself thinking about that afternoon in the department store with the same sharp clarity it had carried on the day it happened. Time had softened the surprise, but it had only strengthened the lesson. The journal had become thicker, not because Ryan had planned another gift, but because I had quietly started writing in the empty pages that remained. Without discussing it, we had turned it into something we shared. Some nights he would add a memory before I fell asleep. Other nights I would write about a moment that seemed too ordinary to matter, knowing that one day it might become one of the memories we treasured most. One Saturday morning we decided to stop by the same department store while running errands across town. As we walked through the entrance, I caught sight of Sarah helping another customer near the service desk. She recognized us immediately and her face lit up with a warm smile. "I was hoping I would see you two again someday," she said as she walked over. Ryan thanked her once more for protecting his surprise, but she shook her head gently. "You thanked me enough that day," she replied. "The truth is, you reminded all of us why this job matters. Sometimes we think we are only folding clothes or answering questions, but every once in a while we get to help preserve a moment that someone will remember forever." Before we could answer, another familiar voice called from behind us. It was Margaret Hayes. She looked healthier and more energetic than I remembered, and she greeted us like old friends. She told us she had started volunteering twice a week at a local senior center because the kindness she received that afternoon had inspired her to become the kind of person who noticed others more intentionally. "One small act changes another," she said with a gentle smile. "You never really know where it ends." Her words settled deep inside me because I suddenly understood that the story had never been about one surprise or one gift. It had quietly spread from one person to another, touching lives we could never have predicted. As Ryan and I continued shopping, I noticed him stopping to return an abandoned cart to the front of the store without thinking twice. A young father nearby smiled and did the same with another cart. It lasted only a few seconds, and perhaps no one else even noticed. But I did. Kindness often moves through the world without applause. It simply gives someone else permission to become a little more thoughtful than they were a moment before, and sometimes that is how lasting change begins. Today the journal rests on a wooden shelf in our living room where anyone visiting our home would probably mistake it for an ordinary notebook. They would never know that inside those pages lives the story of a Saturday that quietly changed the way I understand love, gratitude, and kindness. Every now and then Ryan and I still add another memory before placing it back on the shelf. Some entries celebrate birthdays or holidays, but most describe moments that no one else would consider remarkable. A cup of coffee waiting beside the bed before sunrise. A long walk through the neighborhood after dinner. A handwritten note left on the kitchen counter during a busy week. Those are the moments that become the invisible threads holding a marriage together. Looking back, I often think about the exact instant Sarah leaned toward me in that department store and softly said, "Come with me." At the time those words filled me with uncertainty. I imagined every possible reason except the truth. I believed I was walking toward bad news when, in reality, I was walking toward one of the most meaningful reminders of my life. That whisper did not lead me into fear. It led me into gratitude. It reminded me that the people we love sometimes carry beautiful intentions we cannot yet see. It also reminded me that complete strangers can become part of our most treasured memories simply because they choose compassion instead of convenience. I still remember Margaret Hayes and the gentle smile she wore as she thanked Ryan for helping her without expecting anything in return. I remember Sarah protecting a surprise that was never hers to keep. I remember David treating a deeply personal moment with respect and kindness. Each of them became part of our story without ever planning to. Sometimes I wonder how many lives quietly touch our own every single day without us noticing. Perhaps that is why I now try a little harder to slow down, to look people in the eye, to thank them sincerely, and to remember that everyone carries a story hidden beneath the surface. The greatest gifts rarely arrive wrapped in expensive paper. They arrive through ordinary people making thoughtful choices when no one is demanding that they do so. If there is one lesson I hope never to forget, it is this. Never assume that love has already been understood simply because it has been felt. Speak it. Write it. Show it while there is still time. Because sometimes a promise to wait just a few minutes becomes the beginning of a memory that lasts a lifetime, and sometimes the quietest whisper you ever hear becomes the voice that reminds you what truly matters. In the end, it was never the surprise that stayed with me. It was the kindness behind it, and that is the part of our story that I hope will continue long after the final page of our journal has been written.